Really, our goal today is to talk about board reporting. We've seen a huge shift within this space, and so we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about some of those regulatory drivers that may have also been the cause of some of those shifts that may impact you or may be impacting you in the near future here. We also want to talk about a customer transformation, right? So not just like what we think is best practices or what we're doing, but how our customers are currently using the system today and how it's helping them with their board reporting and hopefully some efficiency within their board reporting. And then Christian will go through a live demo of kind of what that might look like for you presenting to the board with our system live, and then we'll talk about some next steps at the end. So without further ado, Christian, I'll kick it over to you.
Sweet. Let's do it. So to Alyssa's point, having conversations with the board, wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have to prepare a board report for every single thing all the time? And obviously, that's more of a rhetorical question, right? We need to be able to report to the board. But with Logic Manager, you genuinely shouldn't have to manually create things every single time, every quarter. That's something we want to work to eliminate. Think about what board report looks like for your teams today. Someone spends days, sometimes weeks, hopefully not, chasing down certain updates, reconciling conflicting numbers, stitching things together in a presentation that reflects the state of business as of last Tuesday when it was created, right? It's not ideal. And by the time that it's something that's printed, it's just distributed, it's going to be out of date. And the moment a board report asks, or a board member, excuse me, it kind of asks for more of a follow-up question that you might not have anticipated. You're either flipping through pages, hoping that the answer is there somewhere, or saying, the words that no risk professional really wants to say, of like, let me get back to you on that. I know that I've been in those types of meetings before, and it's obviously uncomfortable. The scrambling nature is certainly something that isn't ideal. And the idea that we've kind of had is that's not oversight. That's catch up. And we want to help with oversight here at Logic Manager. So today, we're going to kind of show you what it looks like when board reporting isn't just a separate project in and of itself, when it's something that's simply a natural output of the system that's already active, connected, and continuously, more reflecting what's happening across your organization.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we're seeing this shift as well from you guys can read a little bit more about each of these regulations, but there was a new regulation in the EU that came out, DORA, that went into effect of January 2025. All of these kind of regulatory pieces could incur some pretty heavy fines if you're not up to date and you're not kind of following those best practices there. And I don't think it's necessarily an if those best practices will become a reality, but kind of a when piece. So as you can kind of see with some of these examples with the HIPAA rule and the CPPA, they are requiring you to do continuous monitoring. So it's not just like a one time a year I'm doing my risk assessments and I'm preparing my board report and that's all that I do. It should be an iterative process, not just because, you need to do it, it's a box you need to check, but it's ultimately going to help your organization as a whole with performance, with making sure that everybody's following processes and procedures, the policies that you guys have in place are actually working as appropriately set out. And the reason why we have policies essentially in the first place. So really that's the goal of Logic Manager is to help you guys create that oversight structure. So not only is board reporting easy, but the majority of the oversight that you need to provide to your organization is much easier as well. Everybody knows expectations. They've got the proper like kind of goals and guardrails in place, so they have autonomy to function within their space. So that's really kind of our goal, and we kind of wanted to share this as a proof of life in a sense of like not necessarily the matter of if, but maybe when this continuous monitoring and continuous assessment piece is going to kind of hit your guys' plate there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Alyssa, to your point, like one of the things that we're really seeing in some of these board conversations as board members are, not necessarily pushing back on the risk managers, but kind of drilling into certain things and asking questions of like, can you prove that this is current? Can you drill more into this? What changed since last quarter? Like those types of, ad hoc or in the fly type of questions, which are really important, can be really tough when we've put together a perfect PDF, feel like it's what they asked for, and if the answers aren't there, then there is kind of that scramble nature, and that's something that we want to try to avoid as well. So just to sprinkle that in.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So your guys are probably about 80% of the way there if you're already using Logic Manager. You've already got the foundation built. And if you're not there, or it might not feel that way, um, it's probably because there's something maybe a little bit off with your infrastructure. And we have the tools essentially available to you, kind of do a little bit of a reset and a realignment, because the work that you guys are doing is not necessarily, bad work, right? It's more of, is it aligned? Are things connected? Am I doing duplicative work because things are not connected? Things to that nature. So we want to get you guys to a good state that if like some of the things that you guys are going to see throughout the presentation today aren't what your system looks like, that we can get you there to that point to where you guys don't necessarily have to work as hard. Not that that's what leadership wants to hear, but I'm sure you guys are excited about that as well. So we're going to look at a customer example here, and I'm going to let Christian kind of take that over since that's his kind of role and position here at Logic Manager.
Perfect. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, I think it's important to bring up customer examples or individuals that we've had a conversation with to bring some proof of life to kind of what we're talking about, not just from the position of logic managers think this is the right thing to do, but let's talk a little bit about what we've seen and who we've seen it with and kind of what was going on there. And for me, recently, I was able to work with a risk champion who was exhausted. Every quarter, she was spending 40-ish hours, a full work week, manually cleaning things up, reconciling data just to make sure that that board deck matched, what they were looking to report on. Numbers were pulled in from multiple systems, formatted in spreadsheets, checked against each other, and assembled more into a presentation that was as accurate as she could make it. But like I said a few minutes ago, the moment it was finished, it became increasingly stale from that point forward. She wasn't doing bad work. I want to make sure that that's really clear. She was doing the wrong work or maybe allocating work wrong, in like the time, right? That she's allocating that work. What changed is we kind of helped her to activate more of Logic Manager's core processes, and that really helped with efficiency. We think of it kind of like this. Imagine spending your days maintaining phone infrastructure instead of actually making calls. You're so busy fixing the lines that you never actually get to have the conversations that really matter. Activating the right processes in Logic Manager was her easy button, quote unquote. That two-way synchronization meant that when a new policy was introduced and a director asked how it affected, that organization's risk profile, the answer wasn't a research project. It was just a click. The heat map surfaced the connection. It's instantly because the infrastructure was more already in place. The cost of not having that type of infrastructure is real. And we were able to calculate with her that she was basically effectively spending 15-ish% of her payroll on manual reconciliation, work that absolutely should have been free. And that completeness checker within our system revealed that around 15-ish to 20% of the risks in her environment were actually orphaned. They weren't connected, not owned or visible until the system was able to surface them, before they became a problem. And that's just a real world example, something that we want to help mitigate and even exterminate by using our system in the right way, the way that it was intended to be designed and utilized to be able to put hours back into your day to be able to do the things that are, more beneficial and cost effective than reconciliation for certain board conversations. So,
Yeah.
oh, anything you want to add,
Oh
Alyssa,
yeah,
before
I
I
was
jump in?
gonna say too, like what that helped her do too is also put ownership back on the people that it was their job to do those things. Like that's what core processes in Logic Manager does. That's what our kind of easy button does, is to help you figure out where those gaps are and where that accountability should be transferred so
Mm,
that you're not the one just doing all of the work all of the time. Because
mm,
most of the time, especially as risk managers, like you're not part of the front lines. You don't know those risks exist. Most likely the frontline workers that are the ones that know those things in advance or know what metrics matter and things like that. So we want to help you guys transfer that ownership back to the process owners so that you can spend that time on this analysis part that Christian's going to.
yeah, definitely. And we had a workshop not too long ago, really about that topic of separation of duties. To Alyssa's point, you shouldn't be the cook, the server, the eater, like everything at a restaurant, right? We want to make sure that you can do your specific job and job well, and then allocate to the other individuals that are part of that process. But with that in mind, let's take a look at this in action. I will be navigating to a couple different areas of the system. I'll do my best not to have mouse fatigue and move slowly, but there are a lot of things that I want to be able to drill into, showcase, and what that looks like. First, I'm going to start in one of our out-of-the-box custom reports. I want to be really clear as I navigate into the environment. We are not taking away custom reporting. That is still something that you will have the ability to do, still something that is okay to work on and configure. That's why we have out-of-the-box reports. I want to make sure that that's clear that we're not turning that off for anybody, as obviously as I'm jumping into one of our out-of-the-box reports. But obviously, the live environment is something that we want to make sure is configured correctly. So, one of our out-of-the-box reports, top risk report, really giving a view of what are the top 10 risks organized by residual index within our environment. We can see what core process these indicators have been tied to. We can see what plans these indicators have been put into. And when I say indicator, obviously I'm referencing risk. We can see the hierarchy of that risk, as well as what is that actual score. This is obviously important at a glance to see, hey, what are our top 10 risks? Something that is important to be able to know, something that is important to be able to have so that we can allocate, that we can have for different conversations. But this is a good example of something that is, if I download this, it's stagnant, doesn't change, right? Like we downloaded it and it can't be necessarily updated. But it is important to be able to know. So we can look through this and see like, hey, misuse of confidential information, one of our risks that is in the information technology plan. Really high impact, really high likelihood, really high assurance, really high residual index, right? This is something that is we want to be able to see and we want to be able to know as we kind of jump into our environment. So let's take this report and kind of use it as almost a foundation as we're navigating into a couple different areas into the system. So I'm going to jump into Logic Manager for the first time. I'm going to go into our plans area. And then right next to our plans list, we're going to jump into Insight Workbenches, which I hope you've had an opportunity to at least glance into already. I know that we already have some LMU articles about each of these that start to color in what they do, how they work. So definitely encourage you guys to be able to use LMX to ask some of those questions. We'll go through a couple of them today. Not all of them, obviously, for the sake of time, but we'll go through a couple of them today. But this is an amazing tool to give that live insight of what's going on and when. So let's start with my personal favorite, probably just because I like what it spits out. Root cause. This root cause workbench is kind of giving us a holistic view of impact, risk, and likelihood assurance from those risk assessments, showing not just the risk levels, but how many times a risk has actually been assessed across different plans. This helps us to kind of prioritize mitigation efforts by focusing on more of those underlying issues that may be affecting multiple parts of the organization. One of the things that we can do is we can filter by times assessed. So maybe we don't really care about risks that have been assessed only one time. Maybe we want to say if it's been assessed any more than 3 times, I want that to be something that I see here. What is that risk? What are the times it's been assessed? What's the average impact, likelihood, and assurance? What's the average volatility? inherit and residual index, giving us some insight into what those are live in the system. So if this were to change by a risk owner, save that risk, it's going to update right here in this moment. There's no need to, update any sort of reporting portal to pull that information in. And one of the things that we noticed in the report we were taking a look at, one of the risks that caught my eye was misuse. Can drill into that and see, hey, misuse of confidential information is a risk that is in a couple different categories, but it's been assessed a couple different times in different areas. And this root cause in Workbench kind of allows us to be able to drill more into that. So if I click into the misuse of confidential underneath the category of people, which I know was the risk that we were looking at, it's going to open up a new tab for us and take us directly to this risk in our risk library. And the new tab, I think, is helpful because we don't want to necessarily eliminate the space that you're already in. But it's going to open up a new tab for us to kind of take a look at, okay, it was assessed 3 different times. I want to drill more into that. I want to understand like why, by who. And with this, we can kind of get a little bit of a heat map right here, showing what plans this risk has actually been added into. And this heat map is giving us some insight into how those risks are doing. You can see that in the plan of human resources and operations, the risk has been doing good. Normal impact likelihood, normal impact likelihood. The green dot is kind of speaking to how well those controls are working. But we can see one, that information technology was the one that was showing up in that report initially that we took a look at, that high residual index of 25, something that isn't good, right? We want to understand what that is, why that's going on, and how do we mitigate, what's occurring there. This allows for the individual that's kind of getting access to that to be able to take those corrective actions, jump into that plan, create potentially a mitigation activity or a task to be able to send out to the owner to say, hey, I'm not sure what's going on with this risk and why it is such a high score, but we need some eyes on this. This is something that we want to avoid. This is affecting the business. And this heat map through that Insight Workbench is giving the individual and the users the ability that have the right permissions, obviously, to jump in to be able to take some action on things that are occurring. Now, from that, let's kind of pull back just slightly from looking at an individual risk in the library. And what we gain access to is actually the enterprise-wide heat map, which I'm sure is something that you guys have seen as you spend time in your risk library. Within this, we get the same type of heat map, but we have an opportunity to be able to filter on a couple different things, whether it's on plan names or specifically business processes, thinking of our core processes or our other dimensions. And obviously for this to be able to work, one of the things that needs to make sure is done, and I'll kind of go over this in just a minute, but having these risks actually referenced to these processes is something that's going to make sure that these actually are showing up on this heat map. So if I were to open up maybe the core process view right here, I'd be able to see that one of my functions is talent acquisition and recruitment. And I know that I have some risks that are tied into that, but I can see that not all of those risks might be functioning the way that we want them to, being the actual finalized assessment of that. We have a decent impact, a decent likelihood, but the color of the circle is what's important here. That yellow is something that might need some mitigation efforts to make sure that these risks that are in that function are actually taken care of. So what we can then do is let's jump into our core processes area and take a look at this actual function to gain more insight into what's actually going on here. So if I jump into taxonomy, go into our core processes, and then jump into that function. One of the things that's actually pretty new here in some of our recent updates is as I scroll down, we get some of these heat maps and workbenches that kind of appear right in this function, which is amazing. So let's take a kind of a look at this heat map right here first. This is giving us a view on any risk or indicator that has been referenced to this function. And by when I say reference to the function, I think a best practice here at LogicManager is in those being able to go into references, jump into library, and then choose any risk in the library that we believe is related to this actual function. This is what is driving that heat map working, and obviously these risks being assessed. So if I scroll back down, that's what this heat map is really referencing. Any risk that has been assessed and linked to these core processes, what's showing up right here. So we can see that some of these risks are doing really good. Green, 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 awesome. But things that we want to, pay attention to or get some eyes on is some of these red, big impacts, big likelihoods. This one right here, lack of inadequate or information, lack of or inadequate information security training provided. That's something that we want some better mitigation efforts into. And this heat map is giving the business unit the opportunity to be able to understand what those risks are that affect their function, to be able to get some corrective action plans in place through plans to be able to mitigate those. And that's where this heat map really comes into play, and where kind of following that best practice of referencing those risks into these functions really starts to color these heat maps up. But above it is actually one of the completeness checkers that's driving directly to the plan that's related to this function. Human resources, we can see, hey, there looks like there's only 58% of risks that are assessed. There's only 50% of those risks that have been mitigated or that have controls. That's something that we need to fix. That's something that we want some eyes on, something that we want to be able to take care of. How can we do that? And the cool thing about this completeness checker now living in this core processes area is that when we click on that, it'll open up a brand new tab that takes us directly to that plan and opens up our completeness checker, giving us insight into here are those 14 risks that don't have any assessments. Here are those 17 risks that don't have any controls, 13 controls that don't have monitoring activities. All three of those things really play together to make sure that we have a healthy understanding or a healthy mitigation efforts, excuse me, to what's going on with these risks, how we're taking care of them, and how we're making sure that we're testing those controls to ensure that those risks are something that are mitigated. And all of that stems through that one workbench. Kind of took us through a whole journey of navigating to different areas and how different views of the system live in our environment really point to what areas have gaps, how can we identify them quickly, and how do we take care of some of those things. Now, let's navigate back to our workbenches. Like I said, that all came from the root cause. I think one of the other ones that I really like is this ERM progress. The ERM progress, the workbench kind of tracks the number of risks that have been identified, have been assessed, and mitigated over time, really focusing on each of these sections, systemic, excuse me, assessed, unique, mitigated, and focusing on a percentage of change. Being able to show, hey, quarter over quarter, what has changed? And I think one of the things that I really focused on, at least in the beginning, going through this workbench, is systemic. This is really basically saying there are 10 risks that were in the plan of human resource, or excuse me, 8 risks. Those 8 risks also live in other plans. And we can see that in the next quarter, that jumped to 19. So it was a huge change of risks that grew in that quarter. That's interesting. That's something that we'd want to be probably be able to know of, like, why did that grow so much? What did that look like? Same thing as across the board, we can go over to assessed. All of those risks were assessed. Were there any unique? How many were mitigated? All of this allows us to be able to see what is that percentage of change over time in that quarter to quarter to be able to gain some insight into what that might be. And of course, we can use this to filter down to be able to look at specific plans if some things might not necessarily be important to really see. And then the last workbench that we'll kind of go over is more of the metrics workbench. This is something that even myself, I find myself using a lot for LogicManager's internal use. But this is going to give us more of insight into how our metrics are doing from plan to plan, giving us a live look at those metric activities and those testing activities. What are they doing? How are they doing? What's in tolerance? What's passing? And what's not? Being able to filter on some of those plans as well. So if I wanted to maybe focus on, let's say, the human resources plan right here, this is kind of giving me a time view of what is going on. what's in tolerance, what's doing good, what's not doing good, with the ability to always drill into, I want to jump into that plan, get more of that plan view. What are those monitoring activities that we've designed within this actual plan? Three different monitoring activities that have different results for each of those activities. We can see what those are. Some are in tolerance, some are not. That's kind of interesting. If I hover over them, I'd be able to see that one of the ones that's out of tolerance is that new hire onboarding or offboarding. Like, okay, I might want to jump into this actual testing activity, or excuse me, metric activity to understand what's going on here. What are those results? You can see that there's a couple different metric names that we've been collecting, um, with some of them being okay. And we can always click into the ones that are the little dots. Green is referencing something that is in tolerance. Red is referencing something that's out of. So if I were to then jump up and say, hey, one of the first activities that we did back in 2022 is out of tolerance. Why? We can click right into that result and it'll open up that exact metric activity for us to see, hey, what was our goal here? For new hires, our goal was 10. We had an upper and lower tolerance of 20 and 5, but our actual new hires was 5 outside of that goal of 10. Employees offboarded. We had 15 people that were offboarded when our goal was actually 5, certainly outside of our upper and lower tolerance. So this graph through these monitoring activities is giving us insight visually into what's going on, how are we doing at a quick glance. Now, something that I think is really helpful is we have the ability to be able to download each of these workbenches into PDFs down here. So if this was something that you were about to jump into a meeting or something that you did want to pull out of the system, obviously you do have the ability to export this in that bottom right-hand corner to be able to pull it out. But each of these workbenches are really designed into showing you what's going on in the moment, live in the system, without necessarily having to go into the report portal to be able to configure these things, design these. So our hope and what we've worked to design is that with LogicManager, board ready reporting isn't just a separate project. It's just the natural output of a connected and continuously updated system. And this allows you to be able to spend more time, or less time really, assembling reports and more time actually actively managing risk with more of that confidence and credibility in every board conversation that you find yourselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. And just something to add there too, Christian. I just had a conversation yesterday with someone that was like, hey, like my board isn't really going to be the ones like logging into the system, maybe. But this is something that you can have in your back pocket that instead of flipping through those pages to find, those questions that they're asking, like maybe they're not getting into the system, but you're able to click in on those metrics. And when they ask those questions, it's just one click away, or you can share your screen and kind of present these workbenches along with the static reports maybe that you're giving them,
Yeah.
so that you can drill into that, because that's the whole goal, right? Is to not to be a data dump for the board. It's to inform them to say, hey, this is what we did this last quarter. This is what we did this last year. This is the changes that were made. And these are our action steps or action plans moving forward, which we'll definitely get into as well. We
Yeah.
did have a couple of questions too, Christian, before we got to kind of the last
Let's do it.
part of our presentation. So it looks like some people might not have access to maybe the Insights workbenches, or maybe some of the areas of core processes. Any suggestions for what they should do? I know we have some help text there that says, talk to your administrator if you're not seeing these meaningful metrics. I think that's our little nod to like, hey, talk to your risk manager to see what access they need to give you so that you can see that. But any other suggestions there?
Yeah, I think specifically from a core processes view, I think that's definitely going to be like that separation of duties of, if you can't see core processes up in that menu, that's likely because that area of the system hasn't been shared, which I think there needs to be conversation of like, is there a conflict of separation of duties if I can see that? If I do have view access to that, if I do have manage access to that, What does it give me? What are the risks here? Obviously, in any of these demos, I have access to everything. So like, look at everything that I can click on, like might not be the reality of what everybody has access to. And that is the separation of duties that we want to be able to enforce. So I think it starts with the permissions that somebody has access to in the system, making sure that they can see the right things, that they're allowed to see the right things if it is in scope with what they're, attempting to work on. Then I think there's a combination of like having those conversations as well as meeting with those, administrators in Logic Manager to see if that's something that can be given.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing too, so kind of in our internal environment, a lot of us don't maybe have access to the library itself, right? You want to kind of limit that to the risk managers, right? You don't want just anybody to be able to like add risks or maybe like see that area. But what's great about enabling core processes and using core processes is if you want to toggle back to that, Christian,
Yeah.
just the core process overview that becomes your front line or your business unit's view for all of the things that they need to be paying attention to. And if you want to go, like, just click into maybe information security or something to that nature. There it is. Um, you'll be able to see that heat map because you don't get that heat map view unless you're, oh, sorry, there's nothing clicked there. That's fine. You can go to your
This is
like
this is
employee.
a good example of there are no risks in the references tied to this function. So like I
Yep,
kind of mentioned of like, hey, for that heat map to work, we need to make sure that there actually is an opportunity of somebody going into references and opening up the risk library and choosing the risks. This is a good moment to be able to showcase like if we want that to
this
work.
is live at
Yeah,
live and in style, guys.
exactly.
But anyways, that overview tab, I don't know which one you showed previously. I can't
I
remember.
think it was this one right here.
There we go. Perfect. You can see that heat map there, but that's basically this is your roadmap. This is your insight into your processes, into your unit to be able to just narrow in on the things that you need to focus on. And if you continue to scroll down, those other insights workbenches are available as it relates to your process as well. If you have metrics tied to your process, those will also show up in this overview section. So this is where we were talking about that accountability and enablement of your frontline employees or your managers that should be doing this stuff kind of on a regular basis. Like this is their view to be able to take that ownership and see kind of where the gaps are there. So I just wanted to kind of point that out there. There we go. There's a metric progress dashboard there. And you can do the same drilling in. So if you say, go to metric progress, you don't have to click on that, Christian, unless you really want to, but go to the metric workbench. It would take you to that workbench. It would have it already pre-filtered for your
Mhm.
process. So you can do that same drill in functionality that you had previously. You can see information technology there, and you can kind of do those same steps to do that investigation and things like
Yeah,
that. Um, so really, again, trying to make it live and usable for your organization to kind of enhance that performance.
yeah,
Um,
certainly.
we also did have a question in the chat, Christian. Somebody mentioned they've been seeing kind of easy button everywhere on their
Yes.
screen. And they want to know kind of what happens when I click that easy button and if it's reversible and kind of what the purpose. Maybe we can share a little bit more of the why of the easy button there.
Yeah, for sure. Not reversible. I don't lead with that to be like, it's super scary. It is not reversible. When it's turned on, it is something that's turned on. But what it really does, and there's been several conversations that I've had with individuals walking through turning it on. What does that mean? But if I jump into plans configuration and go over to general, this is kind of where we turn that on. You can see that once it's toggled, I can't necessarily unchange that. But here are kind of the four bullet points that it's really referencing of saying like, hey, once you do activate this, this is really what happens to your environment. This is what it allows for you to do. It does not take functionality away. It might put the ownership on a different party, but it does not remove any functionality that is within Logic Manager. I think quickly kind of going through each of these four, the plan focuses references. will now be managed through linked business processes. So basically putting an emphasis on the core processes area. And in that references, where we kind of clicked into library, there's other things like the other areas of taxonomy, there's events, things of that in that nature. That plan focuses area is now going to be managed through business processes. So normally in the past, if I went into a certain plan, let's say accounts payable, jumped into profile and down into plan focus, historically, I was able to say, hey, for this plan, I want to reference it to these applications. I want to reference it to these physical assets, other areas of taxonomy, certain programs that we have, policies that we have in place. That first bullet point is basically saying, hey, going forward, this core process of accounts payable is going to be the owner of these other areas of taxonomy, of these references. So I won't be able to add in a single physical asset record. The process going forward is going to say, like, what core process is this plan related to? Any references that this core process has to other areas of taxonomy are going to automatically dump into this area. So DocuSign, Jira, LastPass, Slack, Zoom are all showing up because those references have been made to the core processes, core area of taxonomy. That's kind of what that first bullet point is really referencing. A couple of the other ones are a little bit more straightforward. Um, if a plan currently has any references outside of business processes, a core process will automatically be created to organize them. That's probably one of the things that we've seen, or maybe your eyes kind of saw pretty quickly. If I jump into core processes, there's this new element right here, core processes created from plan focus. And we do have an out of the box report that starts to showcase what those references currently are in your environment, basically stating if there is a plan that you have that does not already have a reference to a core process, because these processes become that kind of source of truth in LogicManager, the system will want to create a core process for that plan. So accounts payable, BSA, EU, PSI, these were each plans that did not have a core process referenced. So the system needed to create that source of truth in this area. This kind of begins, and we'll touch on this towards the end of the workshop in terms of resources that we want to make sure that you guys have as you prepare for turning this on. Um, but that, like I said, that report that we have kind of helps you to be able to see what are those references right now. Let me create those so that when I turn it on, this list shouldn't be something where it's like, oh my gosh, there's 30. We want to kind of shorten that up a little bit to make sure that you have appropriate references in the area. And the last two, just really quickly, but to go over it for the room. When a plan is linked to a business process, all associated resources references will now be included. That's kind of what we showcased when accounts receivable or payable, one of the two, was in that plan. How you saw the applications pull in, physical assets pull in automatically. That's what this is saying. All associated resources that were linked to that business process will automatically pull into that plan. And then those linked resources in that plan will become read-only. So I can't remove some of those applications. I can't remove some of those policies. If they are tied to that core process that I pulled in, then they're going to pull into that plan because the plan isn't the owner of that information. That core process is. So those are kind of what those four big bullet points are really referencing when I turn it on. Again, it doesn't take away functionality in the system. I think that's something that I've worked really hard at. Alyssa has as well. I know other OE members in our sessions have worked really hard to encourage and educate of we're not taking anything away. It's just putting the appropriate ownership on the right parties within the system. So
Yeah. They're also it's really just guardrails for other users within the system as well, because without the easy button on, somebody could potentially navigate into that plan focus and they could just start adding random stuff. Or they could start adding risks maybe to the plan that weren't accountable to the core process. But now you have that traceability essentially once you turn that easy button on to be able to know, okay, this risk was referenced from this core process, or this policy was referenced from this area. So it really just allows you to kind of connect all of the dots in these areas and then also make it so that there's one area that you need to update once and then it propagates and sends all that stuff to all the areas of the tool. So it's not trying to like, disrupt your process. It's really just trying to put those goals and guardrails up or those guardrails up so that nobody can kind of mess up your references essentially within the tool and kind of function outside of what's appropriate.
Yeah, and I think to that point, 100% agree. And I think even to like mess up the references, I think one of the things that we saw too, like for the function of talent acquisition and recruitment, obviously for the sake of this conversation, there were several risks that I added into this saying like, hey, these risks directly relate to or affect this function that we have going on. If I were ever to create a plan, let's create just a new one just for the sake of this conversation really quickly. It's a risk plan. Next, instead of me manually guessing, what are those risks that I need to add into this plan? With the easy button turned on, I can take the guesswork out of the risk manager and put that ownership on somebody else. So instead of adding risks manually, I can go into profile, down into plan focus, and find that core process. And when I save it, it's going to give me this quick excerpt. Hey, any indicator that's been referenced to that core process is going to automatically pull into this plan. Takes all that guesswork out of this risk owner when they're creating their plan and putting it on that business unit to then say, hey, if I jump in, here are those 17 risks. They're not risks that I had to go in and find them manually. But because that business unit was able to do their own work and find out what those risks are that affect them and what they're working on, this risk owner can then just go through and add them via that plan focus. That is easy button functionality. And if anything, that's new functionality that if it wasn't turned on, that we wouldn't necessarily have access to.
Yep. And then you can also toggle over that little question mark too, and it tells you exactly where that risk came from. So maybe you wanted to create a finance plan as a whole, and you wanted to have accounts payable, accounts receivable, and procurement or something like that all under one plan. Because your risks are already linked within those core processes, you could just add those core processes to a finance plan, and all of those risks would propagate into the finance plan. You would see which area or which risks came from which core process. You can assign out those risks differently because it might look different, in the assessment from the lens of finance as a whole versus like the accounts payable process individually. So we just want to make it easy for you so that then you don't have to think, okay, now which applications now go with this area? And
Mm,
okay, I removed it here. Now I got to remove it here. So it just takes out all of that thinking
yeah,
there and just makes it automatic for you guys.
yeah,
So that's really the goal.
yeah,
Oh, and I know we're close to time here, Christian. So
yeah.
I want to kind of be mindful of that here.
Jump back.
So Um, just to kind of wrap everything up here, like really our goal is to help you guys shift from that kind of manual task management piece, even though that is part of your job, but shift it to that oversight aspect. So those heat maps that you guys get to analyze, being able to focus more on, okay, are my controls being effective rather than like, do we even have controls in the first place? Are those activities that we're doing actually helping or um, rather than kind of setting those up in the future? So that's really the goal of kind of the easy button, these board reports, is to make it easy for you guys to aggregate, propagate, kind of reorganize information based on these different lenses so that you can kind of assign tasks out to the accountable owners to start that remediation more so than like, hey, you need to just do this assessment.
Yeah, yeah.
So we definitely want to leave you with a couple of next steps here. I think we answered some questions, unless I'll pause here if there's any additional questions maybe that people didn't get a chance to type there in the chat or Q&A there.
And while they're doing that, I'll pull over that checklist that I know that we're going to be sending out
Amazing.
afterwards
There,
as well.
amazing. There is also an additional report that your CSM can also pull for the easy button as well. So definitely reach out to them if you guys are curious about it, but I'll let you kind of toggle through this here.
Yeah.
Uh, yep, go ahead.
Like I kind of mentioned, like, hey, when we turn the easy button on, it can add things into the core processes list, and it's because of the references area. So one of the things that we've developed is what is in your configurable reports. And let me zoom in. Goodness gracious. So everybody can see what in the world I'm looking at. It's in your configurable reports underneath your strategic. It's called plan focus gaps. This is going to give some insight into all of the plans that are in this list. It's going to give the plan owners the taxonomy types that that plan has been referenced to, and then what those references are specifically. What we want, what the goal is here with this report is to be able to see a plan and make sure that there is a core process that is showing up there, not something where CCPA has taxonomy types, but no core process taxonomy type shown up here. If they isn't showing up here, then this plan would be created as a core process. So it kind of gives some insights into where am I at right now, what references need to be made, and to what plans, so that I can competently switch that toggle over, and then nothing really grows in my core processes list. I just gain access to some of those functionality pieces that we went over just a few minutes ago. So in a perfect world, we'd have things more on the list like plan name, BSA, AML has these different taxonomy types, and we can see that core process is one of those things that shows up here. It's linked to a couple different references.
Yep. Another thing to note too, if you scroll down, Christian, we've added this. If you guys have looked at this before, we've added this. But something to make sure that you guys also check is not just like the plan focus in that area too, but make sure that all of the risks that have been toggled on, like in this library area, and if you're not using core processes, there's most likely nothing toggled on here. But if there is anything toggled on here, just like you guys saw in the demo, those risks will be pulled over to that plan once you add that core process.
Mm.
So you just want to make sure that when you're turning it on, or that this is all appropriate, so that again there's less work for you guys
Yeah.
in the future there.
Yeah.
Uh,
This will be
Perfect.
something that we send out. So
Yep.
uh, if you're sitting there with your phone trying to take pictures, don't worry. Sit back, relax. We'll make sure that we get it out to you guys at the end.
Yep. And then we are going to also send to kind of a board packet as well. So some of those reports that we went over to, you guys will get that in an
Mhm.
email following this the workshop, so that you guys can kind of see what those board reports look like. There's also some stuff about the RMM, which I think we're going to have a couple more workshops coming up for that as well. If you guys aren't familiar with that, I definitely encourage you to take a look at that. But looks like we don't really have too many more, or if any questions, but um, I think we've touched on all the things.
Cool.
But
Yeah, and I think some next steps, like important to be able to end on a high note of like, this is all really great information, but what in the world do I do to capitalize on some of this? Obviously sending out those resources is something that we're going to do, making sure that you have everything at your disposal to understand where is your environment right now? What are the things that might need to be slightly adjusted or slightly cleaned up to get you on the right path forward for toggling that? With those resources, one of the things that we'll be sending out is an opportunity to be able to schedule those onboarding and enablement sessions. That'll be with me or members of my team, giving you guys an opportunity to sit down with us and walk through some of that information, continuing to encourage you, pointing you in the right direction, making sure that you have the right answers and feel, more confident in moving in that direction. Turning on that easy button so that you have more of that better foundation for that board reporting. And then we can celebrate in those board meetings knowing that you're configured and in the right place. So those are kind of high level, some quick things, quick next steps that help us to get to the right place.
awesome. Well,
Sweet.
thank you guys for spending your lunchtime with us. We're excited to see how everything goes and hear more success stories that hopefully we can share in our upcoming workshop. So we'll see you guys next time.
Bye, everybody. It's good to see you.
Bye.